really wanted to do in this presentation. It's a bit broad. There's a couple of people who ask me like, hey, write your predictions for next year, like what's gonna happen and all. And honestly, my predictions were like kind of not great, like a little bit, I don't know, a bit generic. So I thought, okay, I'm gonna look back and rather talk about what we've learned about what has changed for the last year or year and a half or since ATT basically. What we've learned about what has changed, but how do we actually go around it and keep growing, right? Keep growing our apps, okay. And I'm gonna do that at 4 levels. The first one are a bit like trends from the store. Obviously, if you want the bigger number and stuff, I think there's a presentation from both Data AI and Sensor Tower, maybe even right now. So maybe that would have been the one. But there's a couple of trends that I isolated that I think are interesting. And also, I'll try to show a few things that those numbers are not showing, like what is behind the number. The second one is obviously ad measurement. And what attribution look like these days, like not where we come from, but how we adapted to this change, and a little bit of what's coming as well in this one, obviously, because it's still a bit of a transition period as we all learn how to deal with different sources. Evolution of channels is a bit of a winner and losers of the last year or two, in market share, but in performance and so on. So basically who has taken Facebook money, more or less, in a summary. And the last one, because all of this is pretty high level and strategic and not really practical, try to move on into operationally, then what do I do with this information? What do I do with this high level trend, and where do I focus? Where do I put my resource? Sometimes where do I not put them is even a better question, but yeah. So those are the 4 parts, cool? Fantastic. All right, so store trends, big numbers. Those are from Sensor Towers. What we've seen this year is something that, I don't know, I've been following these numbers for almost 10 years, like, and for the very first time, we've seen negative numbers here. Like, I never saw that happen. So I specifically cherry-picked the one I wanted for my narrative. But we can see here in Q2, for the very first time, the downloads have fallen by 2% or whatever. Like that, as long as I can remember, I've never seen that. And then that one is Q3, but it doesn't really matter. Revenue has also gone down. It's gone down on Apple, it's gone down on Google, a lot more. I also read other numbers that directionally go there. I think it was JP Morgan that said that Apple made 5% less in September than last year. I don't really care if it's 2% or 5% or whatever. They're all estimates anyway. But I thought this was a very relevant trend because we've never seen it before. Does that mean that this App Store craze that we've done is peaking and that we're at the top and then from there on it starts going down? I do not think so. So I don't think this is the conclusion from that, but I was still a quite interesting number. And the thing behind it is there's a bunch of different factors that are pushing for this, let's say, slowdown. I think the bigger question here is it structural or is it just conjunctural? My conclusion in 3 slides is going to be that this is conjunctural. Spoiler alert. But let's look at it. I think there are 3 big effects that are behind. There are also other effects, but there are 3 big effects that are behind this stop of growth trend. The first one is worsening macroeconomics, inflation, worriness in the market, investors freaking out, crypto crash, stuff like this. The second one is the effect of Apple App Tracking Transparency, the change they did a year and a half ago that pretty obviously hammered down a bunch of business and really make them slow down. Not necessarily everybody, but it did harm a certain number of players. Pretty much everybody, but some more than others. And the last one, which is also seen in e-commerce and in other sectors, not specifically to apps, is a bit of a reversion to the norm because we have to recognize that what happened 2 years ago for a bunch of apps that depend on local, let's say, physical things was a bit of a problem. But for most of us who sell digital stuff, it was actually a great time to be there. Like, and there was exceptional growth in Q2 2 years ago. And in a way, it's not necessarily that we stopped growing. It's just that we went back to this trend. I took this graph that is not fully updated because it's only gone to March. But when I should have put the last one, but it doesn't matter. We're basically back on where we were before. It's just we corrected this exceptional jump that happened. But it was a bit doomed to happen. We couldn't sustain like that kind of craziness unless we all stick at home forever, which is not a really great look. And the issue here is what's what, like what's affecting most, and how do I untangle like these three effects? I don't think there is a way to untangle these three effects, kind of hard to exactly measure. There's a very good series from let's say my guru, and I'm a groupie of Eric Seifert, and he's got like a 3-post series about that. That's called How to Survive the Mobile Winter, which I think is a more detailed version of what I'm saying right now. He's got a very strong opinion that actually ATT is responsible for the most of it. Like, because you look at TikTok, YouTube, Snap, Facebook, which I didn't put there, all going way down. But you look at other businesses that do depend partly on advertising, like Spotify, not necessarily only advertising, no, but also Hulu or Netflix and all. And they kept growing, and they don't, like those who didn't have a strong dependency on ATT did not see the trend that those who did. Like, so obviously when you're like bigger company like Google is a bit of a mix because some of the business depend on it, but not all. And we see that search ads kept growing strong and YouTube was down, and you're like, interesting pattern. I don't mean it's a necessary conclusion, but it's kind of an interesting observation to see that the most dependent you were from ATT, like, or for the big company, the more they were affected in the result, which is kind of a signal that ATT was like one of the massive factors for this. I'll let you read on Eric's blog more about it, and I'll move on that I'm still confident there's more growth predicted. So I took the same source for a bit of consistency. Like, yeah, we're still gonna go up, like this is just conjunctural. Obviously, everyone wants to be positive and prediction are just predictions. It's interesting to follow this graph over time and look back, oh, what did they predict it for this year 4 years ago, which very few people looked at. I didn't put the graph because I made it last minute, but I'll share it on Twitter. And actually, they're not that bad. Like, they don't predict the numbers really well, but the trends are pretty good. I'm still pretty confident that this is gonna happen. One of the reasons I believe that is because I want to believe that we're not all completely fucked. But the other one is that you have to untangle a little bit what's in this big number. No, oh, minus 2% download. Yeah, but what was it? Is it the American market slowing down? Or is it just that in India, they're all moving to the Huawei store, which is not accounted there. They only count the Play Store and the App Store. Is it that games are slowing down and subscriptions are still growing? Yes, they are. Like, if you split a little bit these numbers, I took it from the full report and I had to recalculate because they don't necessarily surface it. But that particular quarter when the revenue went down, actually iOS gaming was down 10%, Play Store gaming was down 17%, but both non-gaming on iOS and Play were up and pretty strongly. Like, which, good for me, I defend my own church, like the subscription business is still there. So obviously, we're a subtract of the store. There's not only gaming and non-gaming. Within non-gaming, subscription is a high share of what's measurable in revenue. But you also have a number of players that this year didn't have a fantastic year because investments are not what they used to be, because growth at all costs may not be the trajectory for a few companies, because cash ran out, because crypto winter. Yesterday night, I was talking with Snap, and they mentioned me one of the wallet was spending $1 million a day with them, like about a year ago. You can imagine that they're not spending $1 million a day like right now, kind of not the perfect moment like to do that. So obviously, it was pushed down like this kind of segment of downloads. And I'm not saying here like games are fucked. I'm just saying these numbers, they hide sub-trends that every vertical has their own kind of mechanics and its own trend. And lucky for those in the subscription business, we're still up and running. So let's kick it. This was also the very first time it happened that historically, the measurable revenue, which is the store revenue, doesn't include credit card, shopping, Uber, whatnot, but does include all the IAPs from game and subscriptions, has been pretty much 70% gaming for many years. And it's only really recently that the subscription growth made it that for the very first time this summer, non-gaming kind of reached this 50-50 point. Those are also estimates, just the trend that is behind that really matters. But I think that was really relevant because we were never close to that until COVID, pretty much. And then they do share this graph where we see, okay, so the overall trend is there and we're pretty much stalling, but this is non-gaming. Well, actually the trajectory is not only consistent, it's like really strong on this point. So yeah, go subscriptions. Okay. Summary of the first part, because a few people arrive and the room is a bit packed. You can also go there if you want and stuff. For those who have missed things, there's headwinds. Oh, the store have peaked, the store have peaked. Yes, both stores will keep growing. It's just not at the pace of before and not necessarily for all the vertical. A lot of the app revenue growth now is coming from iOS subscriptions, and perfect. This is where I focus. I had a longer version of the slides. I actually showed to Christian recently, but I'm going to skip for the sake of leaving a bit of time for question, hopefully, because I like to talk too much about business models and about Android versus iOS, but I'm going to skip that. Second part, what did we learn about ad measurement this year, or year and a half, or whatever? Obviously, ATT changed a lot of things. And the biggest one is we had it simple before. We had a good run. Like, it was nice. With AppsFlyer, Adjust, and some other being our best friend here to make our life easy until suddenly it can't be easy. That's the thing. Anyone who's expecting a solution, plug and play, that is just as easy as what we had before, bad surprise. This doesn't exist. But we have to embrace this new world. And there is clearly more complexity. The complexity comes, and Natalie said, Nat said it pretty well in the session just before. You have to deal with various sources of truth. There's not one source of truth that will tell you the whole story. You have to look at these different data points that you have. So I listed a lot just to confuse people, and so they're reading the slide instead of listening. But there are a lot of data points that you can look at. What is the ad network self-reporting? What is the SK network data showing? Sometimes the one the network sends is not even the one that Apple sends for a number of reasons. What are the consoles saying? Never the same number either. What is my MMP saying? How do I cross measurement from ad service and some fingerprinting and the IDFA cohort and this and that? And dealing with this complexity of different data sources is exactly what the problem that we're facing now. You don't have to look at them all. You look at for specific channels or for specific business, some might be irrelevant. I do mix a bunch of things of product analytics and stuff that doesn't have attribution just to look at. At the end of the day, the learning here for me is, one, you can't compare apples to apples, the different networks. They each have the peculiar intricacy of measurement. You can't take an SK network cost per trial and compare it with the one you've got from search ads. It doesn't make any sense. Like, obviously, this is what the boss wants, no? Hey, how does the network compare? But you can't really compare. You can only compare trends and infer what's below. For me, one of the big learnings here, I have it on the next slide, but it doesn't matter, is there's only one that I believe. Like, I don't believe in attribution at all. I only believe in the total. So obviously, it doesn't inform me which campaign is doing better. Should I invest more on that network or that network? Should I completely stop it? But at least I know where I stand. Like, I know that I can keep spending money because the business is actually not going to crash. Or also, like Nat said, when you see that the total metric doesn't make any sense because your payback is too low, yeah, you have to act on that. Don't keep following it, thinking it's going to get better later. So that's the only one I believe, like the total metric. And then I try to infer what's happening below. And below what's happening is that there's not only more complexity, but more uncertainty. Every one of these data sources, they're not only partial, but a lot of the time they're also muddled, and they don't have the full granularity that we had before, where you can have every single creative and every single segment and every single stuff. Apple has, for some bizarre reason, decided to only report campaign. There's not even a country breakdown. Like, it's kind of madness. There is change coming. I'll get to that at the very end, and I won't detail too much on SK Network 4. There is some small improvement coming, luckily. But for the past year and a half, we've inferred a lot of, let's say you don't want to infer yourself by a complex method of using media mix modeling and stuff, but you just trust whatever TikTok or Facebook or whatever is saying. The metrics they're giving you for creative, they're modeled, which basically means they're made up. This is what they believe, but they don't have the underlying data to prove it. In some cases, they're actually pretty directionally true, and in some cases, they're not, which is usually when you operate at a lower scale, the level of accuracy is slowing down, which is one of the consequences that I didn't put in the slides, is the smaller player, indies, early stage startups. It's even harder for them than it is. Like the way Apple designed this system, actually the bigger player are hurt less than the smaller player, which I think kind of sucks because it concentrates the market a bit further. That's just the reality we need to deal with. And sometimes you need to just go big. Not necessarily complete, not necessarily accurate, but directionally, if you look at it over time and you look at one and another, you end up making like a reasonably informed decision if you look at several of them. The numbers won't match, but the trends should. And when they don't, that's where usually you should be like awake of, what's going on there? So when in doubt, look at the blended, what I call the blended, like the total. And yeah, evaluating the performance by channel is less precise than before. And you'll make a few mistakes on the way. But if you repeatedly make the mistake because the data you're looking at is wrong, you'll end up seeing it. Unless this is like 1% of your business and it's invisible, so it doesn't really matter. But when it's so big, it ends up surfacing. Yeah, and also you can tell your boss that you cannot compare networks to networks. It's just not a possibility. The last one, I changed my title because I initially called this Rest in Peace Organics. And people told me, what, there's no more organic? Like, there's only paid? I said, no, that's not what I meant. Like, there is no reasonable way to say, this is what's organic and this is what's paid. There is not, yesterday I had a question of, oh, do you have benchmark about what's paid and what's organic for most apps? And somebody sent an article from like 2016 or something. I was like, yeah, no, that's not what's happening now. In this article, by the way, 90% of the traffic was organic for everybody. I really wish it was that way, but if anything, it would rather be the opposite because most of your organic, they actually depend indirectly from your spend. But yeah, the app world, the app business, highly depend on paid. This is just a reality. There's very, very few, if any, app that grow to a significant level without organics, without paid. You can grow to a certain extent, and you can sustain an indie business without paid. It's totally possible. But there's a point where paid is going to come into play. Even the bigger one, I mean, I've got a bunch of examples on this. Like, people say, yeah, but TikTok was all viral because all the youngster was like sharing between each other. The year TikTok grew the most in 2000, I think it was 19, but I'm not too sure anymore. The marketing budget for acquisition was $1 billion. Like, and 70% of that went to Facebook. They basically stole these users. They paid for it, and Facebook at the time was happy to get that billion in. I think now they're looking back and say, maybe that billion has cost us a lot more than we thought, but what I'm meaning here is that after a significant, in the App Store, you have to pay for it. But obviously, a lot of people are going to ask, usually an investor, what's your paid to organic ratio? So here, there's a beautiful thing is that we don't have organic, but because SKN network is like obfuscating a lot of data, if you just pull that, and you compare the total, and you make basically organic is total minus paid, the number of organic looks beautiful. So that's the number you're going to share to investors, that's the number you're going to share to the press, but you can't fool yourself. That's not the number you're going to share within your team, and that's not what you're going to believe. Yeah, there is no way to reliably measure what part is organic, but I also think it's kind of a wrong question. Like, you want to do the effort to grow them, you want to keep a healthy balance of not depending too much on paid as much as you can, but it doesn't matter if it's 30% or 53 or 46, as long as you put the effort on both sides. What organic really means, it means non-attributed. I couldn't attribute it to somewhere specifically. And it's happening a lot more than before. It doesn't mean that these organics were not paid for. So, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. I'll take an example to showcase and be more specific. There is this widely shared metrics in the industry that was shared by Apple several times that says that 2/3 of all installs come after a search in the App Store, which is a beautiful number if you're an ASO or a search ads company. Obviously, there's a strong argument. I do believe the number by itself is not correct from what I've seen in other reports, but also in the 20 or 30 apps I work with. I don't think that's correct. But if you look at it from the Apple side, like there's a lot of things we do. Like typically the youngsters don't click the links anymore. Like they hear something on TikTok, oh, that app looks cool. What do? They open the App Store, they search for it. You do influencer marketing, the majority of traffic is going to come not from the link that is in the bio or in the description or what. It's going to come because people naturally open the App Store and look for it. From the Apple side, like people open the App Store and look for apps. This is coming from us, like bring it on. But if you haven't done the effort of actually how you create like this trend, it just doesn't happen. Like, so that's a bit of a fake metric. Be careful about metrics in general when they're not from your business. Okay, so in this case, obviously they happen in search, like, oh, magically attributed to search and not really attributed properly. Like attribution is a pretty complex thing. So I put the money flying over here because you had to spend that money initially. Anyway. It doesn't look too good. More complex, less precise. I have no idea about organic. It kind of sounds bad when and you might think, this guy say he wasn't optimistic at the beginning and he keeps pointing at stuff that's really bad. But in a way, I think that in the long term, it will be for the better. When we had an easy solution, and it was kind of the way to do it, and it was not an issue, but I think we over-trusted what the IDFA method was enabling us. Only last touch, a bunch of things that they couldn't do through IDFA. The web doesn't have IDFA. There was a lot of effects we're not really seeing, but we're okay with it because directionally it was working, because it was the best we had, and because we didn't want to do this whole stuff we have to, and we're forced to. But in the long run, even though in the transition we're probably still early, I think that's for the better. This informed decision based on various sources that is not as accurate might prove better than the other one, or just trusting blindly that this is coming from there. There's a lot of fraud that depending on the last click because it's how it was measured. So perfect, and everybody jump in. There's a lot of this invisible effect that I mentioned, for example, for TikTok or for influencer, that we're not even seeing. Also, just some effect, people come magically, probably my app is viral and everybody loves it. Usually not the case, there's usually an indirect action. And the fact that today we're forced to infer stuff, look at total, try to extrapolate, do media mix modeling, forces to surface insights and conclusions that most people would never have come before in the easy old world of IDFA. So I do think in the long term it's for the better. In the day-to-day, it's still tricky bit. So it was comfortable, but it was not necessarily the best way to look at the bigger picture. I don't think anybody come in the last 2 minutes, so I'm going to skip the TLDR slide. Those are for those who don't listen, and then I can share it on Twitter. And I move to networks. So winner and losers. Winners. Apple, of course. I think here, like, it's clear that Apple has taken a lot more attention and probably, but I think marginally, grew a little bit in marketing mix. The thing is, again, be careful about the headlines that you see in the press. Like, there is this report from Financial Times that reported that 58% of all installs come from search ads, like last year. And nobody looked at the methodology, and everybody took the number, and yeah, Apple is selling half of all the installs, fantastic. And I don't think I've ever seen any app that has 50% of its budget on Apple search ads, or maybe if they spend 2K a month. But like, I've never seen it. Like, what I'm saying is 5, 10, specific vertical with a lot of search, maybe 15 or something like, but never more. The inventory is just not there. Apple is like trying to add the inventory, so they have this new placement that have just come. I had longer slides about this new placement. My data was a bit weak because it's just been a few weeks, so and I thought I really do need to leave the stage at some point. Although James is smart, he put a break just after my session because he knew I was going to be too long. But so I can talk about this placement somewhere else. The summary is that Apple did have a good position in this because ATT doesn't apply to them, obviously. Like, they kind of give themselves a workaround. Like, Google is giving itself one for what's coming on Android as well. So obviously, like, more attention, a bit more budget, and over the last year, more or less, or since ATT, more or less what they're selling in ads has more than doubled. Like, the estimates say that before ATT, they were doing maybe 3-4 billion a year with search ads, and they're probably around 8 or 9 this year. Maybe 10, we don't know, but like to give a bit of a range. The ad market is over 100 billion. Like, this is 10% of market share. This is not 50%. Be careful about the headlines. They are growing. They doubled their share. Congrats. Like, you set it up this way. Fantastic. Still a great channel to go to, but it's not, I don't think you can sustainably grow thinking like, okay, let's go all in Apple because I don't have this attribution problem. Hi, Lisa. So winning to some extent, but I think at the moment they're very limited, and until they put third-party inventory, they will. Like, no matter how much ads they manage to stick in the store there, the way they've designed, and they clearly don't fully understand like how marketers want it in terms of there's no event, targeting is terrible, there's no automation, the UI is the clunkiest as all, and I can say a bunch of networks are really bad at it, but Apple has taken the gold medal here. And it's limiting them, but what's limiting them is not their view on ads and stuff, it's just the inventory. Like there is no way, like even with 600 million people opening the App Store every week, there is no way that can compete with people, like with being stick an hour on the TikTok feed or on Reels or whatever, doesn't really matter. The inventory, the big inventory is there. What's scalable is there. You can grow a little bit at the beginning. So yes, it grows, but only to some extent. You can't go all in on that. I put TikTok with an interrogation mark here. Because like at the time of ATT, they were still clearly growing like really fast, and a lot of people like were slowly moving from, oh, TikTok, it's probably just the youngster there, and I don't know how it works, to let's experiment, and there's a bunch of bigger budgets that are a bit laggard in adoption in new channel. I think like TikTok grew in market share clearly in the last year and a half, but they grew because their audience grew, and they grew because of adoption of their network a lot more than they grew because they managed to find a key to ATT. I also personally believe that in the early days, they approach SKAd network a lot better than other networks. Like the way their campaign deal with this, let's say, weak data was actually kind of strong. Like I have to respect for what they do. Like it was clearly like they understood something that the others didn't, or maybe they just shoot with a bazooka and the flies kept falling. Like maybe, I don't know. Right now we're seeing, and that's like more over the last year and a half, they clearly took market share, but it seemed they've stalled a bit like over the last quarter in audience, in ad sales, because they're also affected by the other. But they were in a good trend, so I'll still stick them in the winners, like because we're putting more attention and budgets and anything to TikTok. Next winner here for my friend in the second row, influencer marketing. Not only like TikTok because it's been growing consistently, but because it mostly doesn't depend on ATT. It was not affected the same way as a network. Because there's a lot, okay, I don't want to detail too much what happened with the track link here because it's not the point. But like I said, most of the effect is invisible. So the only way you're going to approach, how was this up like beneficial for me or profitable or whatever, you have to infer it. And you already had to before. Like, so IDFA, not IDFA, you had to look beyond this measurement part. And so in a way, it's less affected because it was already broken before and it's still broken the same way. It's just we had to learn. In a way, people who were doing a lot of influencer marketing more than 2 years ago, they're a bit in an advantage in this new world because they had to look at this and they had to find ways to infer and go beyond and ask questions about what the track part is. So obviously more attention because it's a real channel now, but also because it didn't depend on the IDFA already. And the last one is a bit of the same. I put web to app. It could be also all the web efforts. I think Jacob in the first session mentioned that they're putting more efforts on SEO and their website. Lots of subscription apps are building web flows like web onboarding. They first acquire a user on the web, onboard them to a certain point, which can be just a landing page to the store, which can be the full onboarding. Some even have the full experience of the app on the web. Like doesn't really matter. There's many ways like to approach this, but clearly a lot more attention. Here I'll make a quick comment, which I've seen a lot of people who go to, oh, let's invest on the web, so we're not going to pay the 30% to Apple. This is a bad reason to do it. There are many reasons to do it. This is not the right one. It's only marginally applies because conversion rates are going to be different. This is not the right one. And then in the last year, I've seen a lot of people, oh, let's go for web because I still have to have attribution there. It is not a perfect reason either. You want to go to the web because to diversify, because the audience is different, because the same network are offering you really different reach and campaign. Typically Google, is operating very differently on the web and on the app. What do I want? I want both. I want both things. It's not necessarily the same users. One thing is going to work better, maybe not in a market, but in a segment or something. And yeah, I want both. So that's the good reason. Like reach, diversification, not an people who think that the web attribution is working flawlessly are also pretty... Attribution on the web is not flawless, and it's going to get worse, like soon, very soon. But I keep that for the presentation of next year, I think. Okay, enough of the winners, a bit of the losers. Anybody from Meta in the room? I don't think so. Facebook clearly took like the biggest hit of everybody, and you can see it in earnings, the valuation that is, I think, like 1/4 or 1/5 or whatever. I strongly believe the reason Facebook lost the most is not because of the competition of TikTok, but also is because they had the most to lose. It was so magical, especially for subscription apps. Like before, You just put your event, let Facebook do the work, and they were clearly at an advantage, not to have the ad inventory, but that their mechanic was so strong. Like we've had a really good time. Like our life was really easy with Facebook. And I've seen a lot of apps until ATT easily put 60, 80, 95% of the budget to Facebook, and that was not a bad decision. It's just what was working best for a lot of us, and that's where obviously they had the most to lose because their whole optimization machine was more sophisticated and was just performing better than the rest. And suddenly they took the hardest hit because Apple has kind of leveled down the playing field. Like kind of everybody is more with the same weak data, and they had the most to lose. And I think that's the reason. That being said, even after taking this big hit, they still have a very high market share of marketing budget. Not only because we don't want to let go and we're like this, like Natalie, but because it's still a very relevant channel where people spend a shitload of time on Instagram. And there are ways to, and the platform works less than before, but it still does to some extent. The thing is becoming one of your weapons instead of being the fully dominant weapon, and then I've got a bit of budget here and there. I've seen some significant, sizable different benchmark about budget mix, and in both of them, Facebook was still around 50% of ad spend. That exclude TV, web, influencer, and a bunch of things, but among networks on iOS, not on Android. But so maybe before they were at 60, 70, I don't know, and they maybe at 40, maybe at 50, I don't really believe the exact numbers, but it's still significant. They're still the #1 player overall. It doesn't mean that Facebook should be your first channel, but it's still significant that after losing so dramatically, they're still the first, because they come from far. Might be different in a couple of years. The trend is not looking too good for them, but still, if you're not doing anything on Instagram, it's kind of, and you're doing paid elsewhere, it's kind of a little bit bizarre unless you're a hyper casual or there are specific things that would justify it. But I do think it's still a very relevant channel after it lost so much. Most other paid channel also lost a lot. Everybody was affected hard. Snap, Twitter, I mentioned a bit TikTok before that had the both effects. Twitter, I don't know, I see some apps advertising there. I always have questions. If I meet people from those I see, I'm thinking of Headway, for example, that I keep seeing. I'm curious, how do they do it? Because every time I went there, not only there was no scale, but it was really bad. And that's not because of Elon or anything. It was already bad before. It's not even because of ATT. It was also bad before. Anyway. I put YouTube here, which is kind of a special case because it's mixed within the rest of UAC. But the fact that Google didn't put the ATT prompt in YouTube certainly doesn't help the inventory on UAC. And for most of my clients, the share of what we're getting from YouTube is less. We're still getting good quality user, but a bit blind. Some others like Quora and Reddit are not so super relevant, but Pinterest, when they saw ATT, they just decided to close down their app install product. So, oh, what's that? Let's go. I can also understand it because the focus is more on e-commerce and on brand because of the nature of user intent on the platform. I had a really good run when they opened the app install product, and then suddenly it went nowhere. I'm a bit sad in a way because there's really interesting way to capture user attention on this network, and we have to do it through the web now, web flows or landing page or whatever it is. Oh, look, the list of losers has ended. Basically, only Facebook is fucked. Okay, I didn't put Google with the losers here. I'd say, what's up with Google? The thing with Google is that the business is hard to analyze like the other one because there's a lot more inventory on Android than iOS, so obviously not affected by ATT there, and even positively because a bunch of people shifted money from iOS to Android, which eventually benefited them. If you look at the Android ad spend, the overall market share of Google in ad networks on Android is I'd say scary, it would be the word, but I can't really reveal numbers, but it's way above 50% overall. It doesn't mean you should put all your money on UAC, but it's clear it's where there is a lot of inventory. Google has a lot of data to optimize for, and for most people, it's just what works pretty decently. Not always, but I had a lot of issue with that, but it doesn't matter. They still hold the majority market share. They're basically growing at the pace of the market. They're doing great. They also have their obviously non-app business that is still doing really good. When you look at iOS, surprisingly, it was a much more secondary player than I imagined. Actually, the share of budget that go to UIC on iOS was not that high. And so they didn't have that much to lose, basically. They didn't adapt to SKR network, no optimization based on it. They didn't put the ATT prompt. So, okay, fuck it, let's just roll with what we have. And they basically didn't even change their system at all, which I find very surprising. I do think it's a missed opportunity, and they might change over time. Every month, I hope that finally they're optimizing for SKR network, especially for those who don't show the prompt, like Kids app and stuff, but they don't. YouTube revenue has been gone down. For some reason, people keep investing there. Maybe it's profitable for you, but basically the part that they lost, like this part where they lost, was a very small part of their business, so they weren't affected that much. And if anything, it was rather positive because on Android they're doing awesome. I put all our networks here together at the last player. I didn't want to be too specific. I'd say here it's a bit of a mixed bag, like of winners and losers. Some networks clearly grew and they did something that either they adapted to SKR network really well, or maybe they're just not following Apple's rules, a bit of a mix. But clearly a bunch of networks are doing great in the last year. I think Iron Source and Vungle in particular have had a really good run. I see that in some numbers from this benchmark, which are under NDA, that's why I'm not giving numbers, but also I see it in my clients, like a lot more interest. You look at 3-4 years ago, subscription ad, looking at that, and it's just like, no, I'm not going there. This is full, this is really bad, let's stick with Facebook. But then suddenly there's a lot more interest of, let's try again this thing. Let's split a little bit our risk, let's try it again, because playing field is a bit leveled, and actually a bunch of them have benefited from this. Let's see how long fingerprinting lasts and what happens then. But in the moment, like, I'd rather put them in the winner part. For some reason, Unity has not grown as much as the other. I heard they had like internal problem with the other platform. Not necessarily a bad platform to go, but for some reason they didn't win as much. The thing here is that it's really hard to estimate from their earnings because most of the revenue comes from gaming, and because I specialize in the invisible part of non-gaming, the conclusion are a bit hard to do. And I'll skip on the remarketing to get to practical tips, but I'll check the time because I'm probably already out of time. I'm good, actually. Fantastic. Couldn't even believe it. Okay, practical tips to survive the storm. Like I said, all of this was pretty high level and all. What do I do tomorrow? What do I tell my team? How do I organize? First, we have to pull our A game, like the good life we had of rest and vest, looking at those Facebook auto optimization is gone. Like we need to focus a bit and work harder than before. This is the first thing, can't let it go. Okay. Less campaign management. Like, do I have the, yes, I have the meme about it. I already showed it a while ago, but I thought when I showed it back then, I was like, fucker, his performance is better than mine on the left, and I was pissed. It's just the way it's done now. If you're still doing it the old way, like there's something you missed really. Like there's something you really did bad. Like because the role of somebody managing any network on a platform is not to be tweaking campaign all days and segmenting and changing the bids. And actually, the more you do it, probably the more you'll get penalized by all these edits constantly. Like relax, let the hands. This is mostly automated. Your work is elsewhere. Doesn't mean the work has disappeared. Just mean the part where you're doing a lot of campaign management and change and edits, this is gone, and it's been already 3 years that it's gone. It's just like, this is not really new, but there's even less of it because, I mean, you have to bundle more. Like Natalie also said that before, but bundle things, pass the threshold. Like you need to, there are less campaigns, so there's also obviously less time to spend there because I don't have to split all of them. There doesn't mean I have one campaign necessarily, but there's clearly a lot less granularity in management there. And if you're still spending your time there, it's kind of weird. The time you invested there, invested elsewhere, which is where we're going now. Okay, so here at the part where you need to concentrate the budget, make it even simpler. Simplify your campaign structure because you want the most volume. Because there are two reasons. One, to pass this privacy threshold, which is really a big problem for smaller advertisers, where the data becomes really bad. Depends if you have the prompt or not. Depends on a bunch of factors. But I personally try to never have less than 100 installs per day per campaign, regardless of the network. But the more the merrier. It's clear that when I get 500 a day, the data I'm seeing, the modelization that the networks are applying is a lot more, at least it looks a lot more plausible than when you're operating here at 50 install and the modelization gone wide. I have one campaign, like countries were not doing great very recently, over the last couple of weeks, and we moved the budget down. the modelization has gone completely nuts. Like some day tell us 0, some day tell us 50. The reality is obviously in the middle, but it's just they struggle to report on the number. If they struggle to report on the number, you can imagine they struggle even more to optimize on this number. So the reason here to concentrate budget is not only to pass the threshold and have a little bit better data, but to actually give all this machine learning more data points to base decision on and more optimization. And it's a sad thing, but you need to spend more money basically. They're going to be happy hearing that. I'll cut the part where they say they fucked, and I just quote the part where I say, increase your budgets, increase your budgets. They're going to be very happy with that. No bids, all automatic. Just increase your budgets. So go beyond the threshold, but also try to give even more data. And how that's made? Bundling countries, removing targeting, like remove the limits. I'm not happy doing that. It's just you have to. Like it's for a long time before ATT, like for the 2-3 years when we had like this kind of automated campaign on Facebook and they were all telling broad targeting, you could still do a bit of both of things, which is how I like it. Have one fully done by the machine and one that I go to and maybe I put a lookalike or maybe I restrict the age or maybe I, whatever, right? But there's no more of that. Like it's counterproductive in most of the case. In some niche case, no, and in testing, obviously no, but for most of the case, let it go. This is gone, like stop it. All right, next area of focus. A lot of organizations have ASO as a split function, like it's not in the UA team, or it's, oh, that's the organic manager. I say, there's no more organic. Like ASO is part of acquisition. Paid and organic is a known concept. So I have them work with you. Like, and a lot of the role of ASO, I think, there's also other things. Put in-app events in the store to animate and check the keywords and stuff. But most of the part is on actually working on this conversion rate. I mean, not most of the part, but like where you can really make a difference with ASO is with this. And I think here this is where you need to work with whoever is spending money, because what the user has seen, like I think Jacob mentioned this, no? But like make that journey more consistent between what I've seen in the ad, what I'm seeing in the store, and even what I'm seeing in the onboarding. We have some limitation in this. There are a bit more tools like the CPP and stuff. Like you cannot fully always personalize the whole journey, but at least don't serve the exact same stuff. Like don't do it like we were doing it 4 or 5 years ago, because there are ways to do it a little bit more in various ways. Sometimes because it follows a link or whatever, or the CPP. Sometimes because you just know that at this point of time, you're pushing hard on one particular creative. Maybe you've got your Halloween stuff going on. Put it also in the onboarding. Don't change just the ASO listing. Don't like try to see this thing as they're intertwined. The person managing the creative, the person managing the store, and ideally the person managing the onboarding and even payroll should be informed of, okay, what are users seeing right now? Like, and this teamwork was always important, but I think now we have to spend a little bit more focus on it. More data analysts work than ever. Those people spending time on campaign management, what they should be doing is looking at all these data sources and trying to make an informed decision about it. Clearly, the role of a media buyer has gone to waste. Has gone, I need to look at a lot more data, and data analyst is your best friend. No, like I want to be the data analyst. I also love them because they go further than I do, but I need to do half of the job here. And I would never take networks or metrics for granted, just in case a few of them showed up. And the other part is obviously creative, like kind of elephant in the room. If the machine is doing everything, what do I have less? Deciding on budget, my boss is doing that, and deciding on producing better creative. More and better. Better is the most important, but more is also like, it's hard to find a winner. You can't think you're gonna produce 3 and one of them is gonna be the winner. The winner creatives, they're usually so good you can milk them for a very long time. You can put billions of impressions on it. Work hard to find them. It's not an easy job. Like, I'm happy, like I did personalize, with my background of more campaign manager, I went a lot more to the data analyst side than the creative side, just because I suck at it. So what do? I delegate to people who have like this, the skill and have the inspiration and have the ideas to do it, and I just rely on them, but you have to push them to do. Very often, I think here the biggest mistake is not doing enough radically different things. Like keeping on the same, okay, I need to stick with my brand book. I need to, like, this is our core message. Try wild stuff. Obviously, UGC, like user-generated, try memes, try a beautiful one, try very different approach is usually how you end up finding winners, and then you drill a little bit there. But too many people are creating like 30 variants of the same concept before having the not the evidence, but at least the signal that this concept is going somewhere. I think people are doing too similar stuff in usual. It's good to inspire from the other, but go wild. Somebody in this room that I didn't name, I've tried, I was with her at the time, like dozens and dozens of creative, and the metrics were not fantastic. And one day she filmed herself from a phone in the office and put that on Facebook, and that was the winner. It was beautiful, beautiful to witness. I'll not name you, I promise. The other part is you're not working in UA here. Like growth is bigger than that, and you have to like. I think the focus is on getting out of your managing campaign and getting to see. A part of it is in the ASO side. A part of it is within product. Like be more intertwined with it. And one side is oh, what happened there? I fucked it. Doesn't matter. On the events you get, like what can I optimize for, what's happening on the day zero, because this is what Scan is doing. I think we have a fantastic moment coming with SKA Network 4, where we've got a bit of different time frame. I don't want to enter too much detail, but basically we can use data that is not only from day zero. And that's the goal of right now in the next 2 months, look again at what correlates in the long term, like what do you have in the day zero already done, what do you have in day one, what do you have in day 7, and the third window, I'm not too sure of what the data is going to look like, but at least like redo this work because it can help very soon. And the other one is in monetization. So that was the whole part of Jacob, for those who were in the room just before me. The attention that I see of people to let's try to make more money out of each user, let's try to raise the ARPU, has grown so much in the last 2 years. Like the demand for paywall optimization and upsells and all is like way higher than the talent. If you've been fired and you're looking for a job, there's more jobs than the demand can absorb there. Like there's a ton of it. There's a ton of it because this is just one way to fight again. Okay, if the acquisition is less effective, I need to balance it with the other side. And not necessarily great for user because we're putting more paywalls, we're putting them earlier, we're raising the price, we're upselling them, we're removing the swipe limit, we're lowering the swipe limit. But a lot of people have put a lot of focus there in the last 2 years. And if you haven't, there's probably some very low-hanging fruit that can give you a plus 20% in the first few months. Obviously, after a little while, it's hard to find those 20% all the time. You still have to. This is the goal. No matter how efficient the ad inventory is, the inflation of the ad inventory is always going to be 20, 30%, like minimum. In my opinion, the way to battle this is we need to lift up output by at least 20, 25% per year, like over the course of the year and all the experiment, just to counter the inflation. Actually, the improvement, they come after this 20%. Yeah, it's easy when you haven't done any. So I love the client where they're really beginners on this because they always find the same tricks. It gets a bit harder after, but still worth doing it. And I think it's also fun things to do. And CRM lifecycle. Partly because the reach of remarketing is less, so a lot of people have said, okay, let's do the other one because I can't do remarketing anymore. But also because we're seeing like, okay, especially if you optimize the lot on this part, like on paywalls and putting them early, usually you focus on where the big chunk is, which is early on, in the first session, in the onboarding, in the first days. But there are actually a lot of hanging fruits there where it's not fully optimized of, okay, how do I keep people coming back, and how do I upsell even to people who are already paying? What else can I sell them? How do I bring these free users who do retain to do something? And maybe it's not even paying, maybe it's through virality, or maybe it's through looking at an ad, or maybe it's another thing that adds value to your business without entering the subscription or something. But there's clearly a lot more attention on this. And this is shown by, I don't know, a lot of signals. You can see like there's a lot more sponsor for lifecycle company than there was 4 years ago in this forum. Agencies that I'm growing. Andy, how many people have you hired for lifecycle this year? 40 at least, or?
The team, yeah, the lifecycle team grew almost 100% this year.
100% growth for Andy. Yeah. All right. And a bit of diversification. I said one thing at some point is concentrate budget. This didn't necessarily mean put all your budget on the same networks. It means within a network, concentrate the budget on a campaign to pass the data threshold and give stuff and all. Oh, people leaving, this is terrible. A game. Diversify a bit. I'd say like Apple has leveled a bit the field. It's really a time, if you haven't in the last year, of looking at what haven't I tried. Maybe it was different. Maybe 3 years ago I did this lift-off test and it was absolutely horrific. It was. And then I did it 2 months ago and it was actually not that bad at all. Revisit the assumption you had and even past experiment and try things. That can be for networks, but also going outside. I'm not a very strong believer of third-party stores for subscription apps, but it is very valuable for others, because the Huawei store has grown a lot, and the Amazon, I'm struggling a bit, I have to admit. And cross-platform. I already mentioned this as an area of attention of try the Webflow and all. It's rather a high effort, high reward thing, so if your team is less than 10 people, maybe wait a bit, because it's a bit of a tricky one to handle, but yeah, less dependency on ATT, basically. What's coming next? What's coming next is next year's slides. I don't want to talk too much about SKR Network, but I'm happy to take questions about it, like along the day. I'll be there all day. Same thing for the Apple new placement, so I'm not recorded when I say it. I was with Apple yesterday, so I thought I was going to stick to reasonable comments in public, but I'm happy to talk in private. Top-down measurement, MMM, maybe next year I'll focus on that and drill down a lot more than I did, and the Android privacy sandbox. What Android is doing is not exactly the same, what Google is doing is not exactly the same as ATT, but it's coming and it's coming soon. People are like, yeah, they said it's coming in 2024, let's see, maybe not. Because there's the beta and you can already prep for it, but also because they're actually going to roll out progressively. They're not going to, like 2024 is the deadline where they shut down the guide, the Google ID, but advertising ID. But they're actually going to roll out progressively. It's already in process, but they're going to accelerate it. So you don't want to follow a bit the news and so on, and your agency and blah, blah. Thank you very much. I do think I have a bit of time for questions, so I can take some, but most of the questions, they're going to come through the day. Like if you're intimidated by the room, I'm very approachable. I love to give my opinion, so bring it on. Thank you, everybody, for filling the room.